This is a Dear Donald J. Trump, President Joe Biden, now archived, at least his administration, President Barack Obama, his entire administration. It's for all Americans. It's God's honest truth. A kite, an American challenged me on X Space with Jonathan Bahai to challenge me to fly that kite as a Canadian child did in American Canadian history on the first bridge ever built across the United States and Canada waters, Great Lakes. And this, of course, was Niagara Falls, first bridge. The Canadian child did that. The challenge put to me a month ago was fly that kite. So tonight I'm going to fly that kite. One of my hard-working ladies, huge volunteer, loyalist of Canada, the 51st state, Lindsay Milner, sends me a Donald J. Trump post where he goes into half of Canada is owed to the United States. And he goes on to run down Barack Obama. And I am here today flying that kite, the truth, the God's honest truth, the American Canadian truth that is going to upset a lot of people. It's Mark Carney, Stephen Harper, and Frank Dune. This is so explosive. What I'm about to disclose is so explosive. Donald J. Trump is going to sit down in his chair upon hearing this news from his administration, and he's going to take a long pause and think about what I'm imparting publicly to everybody. It may very well cost me my life. I knew leading into what's coming in March, and the choice I made from Trump's first administration that's not in power in his second term administration. And that's fine. It doesn't mean anybody doesn't like anybody. It just means they've been replaced. But they warned me about going public with my first petition. But now I'm going to fly the kite, holding on to that petition. I want to get that petition across. And maybe, you know what? This Gordie Howe Bridge, everybody, that Donald J. Trump is raging on right now, that I promise you when I disclose I'm about to disclose publicly, is going to have him sit down, take a long pause, and really sit down with his administration and look at this. And it may change Democrats and Republicans forevermore, and I hope it does. I hope it really does. It's explosive. It's earth-shattering. It's the corruption of current Liberal leader, Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, and absolutely former Prime Minister Stephen Harper as one on a war with America. And I'm going to bring forward a name called Frank Dunn, who was the CEO of Nortel, that ran from 2000 in explosive Canadian value. All Canadians pumped into that. We were debt loaded. It was the beginning of the end of all our manufacturing and tech industry forevermore, because I'll tell you why. We dumped everything subjects could into that. In 5G, before 5G was ever a thought, China stole that. Huawei stole that. If you don't know, as President Trump right now, who may be getting privy to this right now, if you didn't know, NATO reported, American NATO reported absolutely on all of this. The Dragon Huawei, that for over 10 years' time stole that Canadian technological advancement from Canadians. in full well knowledge of who? Prime Minister Stephen Harper and Mark Carney. Now, do you guys all want to know what's so explosive about this? That Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Donald J. Trump, who are all very intelligent, all three of them, contrary to what you believe, and even Joe Biden in his way about him. That's his genius. And I was very privileged, everybody in Washington, D.C., to be taught the power of president and all their tricks. I was taught that by an academic expert right in Washington, D.C., private invite, and I have one Canadian witness, the only Canadian who's ever been invited to that kind of scenario. Along with, I went to the Washington, D.C. NATO conference with all Washington and NATO generals of every country, including Canada, where they were humiliated and sat in the corner with UK. And this is why my life is probably going to be in jeopardy for flying this kite. There is a man, maybe Canadian, maybe UK, maybe who knows, because I'll tell you something that Donald J. Trump, Joe Biden, and Barack Obama don't know, and they're all their entire administrations. Frank Dunn was the CEO of Nortel that had a valuation in the year 2000 to 2001 of over $396 billion. 5G, highest tertiary technological advancement in communication the world had ever known, way before anybody else, clearly by decades. And it was stolen, yes, by China Huawei, but over 10 years. Stephen Harper claimed a national bailout, claimed it on housing crash and all these things. It was the Nortel crash, exact same value. It was the most debt placed upon all Canadians in the history of Canada in any given time. It was the entire debt accumulation of every Prime Minister in Canadian history before Stephen Harper. All on Nortel, that went from $96 billion to $5 billion overnight. As 10 years of Chinese spying that led to what's currently Huawei and everything NATO warned us about. Do you know the President of the United States that opened up Canada entirely from Ontario through Nortel 5G technology, giving, this is for Donald J. Trump, giving USA access to the first 5G networks? That was Gordie Howe Bridge. The bridge being built across Ontario to Michigan on the 401. Barack Obama signed on to that to get that technology, not steal it from Canadians. The American way, the capital way. Everybody says down with the capitalists. They don't steal. The socialists do. Huawei, China, stole all that in full knowledge of Mark Carney and Stephen Harper. And to prove this point, everybody, including current President Donald J. Trump, this is my kite and maybe my life. I don't know if I'm going to make it to March. I don't know. Especially after tonight, I really don't know if I'm going to make it. But I'm going to shock and awe the President of the United States, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden if he's cognizant of what's going on today. Not that he wasn't a good guy, or at least his administration, because they were all working on this. I'm going to give you something that you should have figured out, or at least had the people intel to figure out, or maybe it's just a very smart subject. Frank Dunn is the only North American CEO where you know his name, you know his crimes, you know what he went through, and he was completely exonerated. But what you don't know is where he was born, what's his birthday, who he is, where he's from, what and who are his family members. Entirely. Do you know in North America there is not one Wall Street, Dow Jones, TSX CEO in all of North American history that doesn't have those bio stats, let alone a CEO of a company worth $396 billion in 2000 in Canada. Even TSX, everybody, Toronto Stock Exchange, right? New York Stock Exchange. I went through all of them. And there's nobody who has not a single shred of bio evidence to even confirm they ever existed, except Frank Dunn, attached to Prime Minister Mark Carney and Prime Minister Stephen Harper entirely. MI5 kind of stuff. War on America kind of stuff. I just broke this for everybody. And everyone who picks up their devices and you try all this information, I broke what President Barack Obama, President Joe Biden, and Donald J. Trump couldn't figure out in all of their administrations. I give that gift freely. That's my kite across Gordie Howe Bridge for everybody. This video is massive, explosive. Gordie Howe Bridge was ascended and passed by Barack Obama with the promise of Nortel, 5G, and everything it was going to do for America long before the Chinese. But as you should all know, every administration which did go through this did highlight the United States, as Donald J. Trump knows, as Joe Biden knew, as he knew of Donald Trump before him, and Barack Obama before Donald J. Trump. It goes on and on. They play their political game like we do in Canada. The difference is they actually work for the American people. And I'm giving this kite because I know you all love the American people and you've all worked for the American people. You've now proved that to me as someone who's a subject, third-class basic slavery in the country known as Canada that owes you half of its territory. Yesterday, preemptively, I published that. I showcased all of Canada, the Great Wall of China, from your satellites, United States of America. That's a real picture. It's not fabricated. That's real greenery. Yes, those are all trees. You've already all been able to analyze it. It's real. America's at its end. Canada owes a tremendous amount. Canada needs a tremendous amount of capital. And the people who stand in your way are the people that would kill Americans. Their names currently living and alive today are Mark Carney, Prime Minister of Canada, and former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. They would kill every American if they could. They certainly would. This is my kite. As was done in Niagara hundreds of years ago, this is my kite for Americans and for President Donald J. Trump. Please take a seat, President. Look at what I've just shown you. You will find the truth, the bridge to you and the Democrats, and I hope to us Canadians. Love you all. God bless. That's my video. That's my treasure. That's my gift. That's my kite. Bye now.